Hey everybody, this is Tony, Tainted Lord A7, and this is going to be a discussion video that was inspired by Steve over at S&T Young and George G's Room of War, where they talk about 10 random bands, albums that not a lot of people talk about or bring up, and even though they're somewhat well known, it just seems that it doesn't get talked about enough. So I got inspired by those two videos to give my take of bands, 10 bands, albums that I feel should be talked about more and should be more known about. Some of these albums, bands that people already know, but again, not a lot of people talk about them, and there might be some new bands here that nobody has ever known about, but hopefully anyone who's watching this will discover something new. So the first band I'm going to talk about is an Italian folk metal band called Furor Gallico, and this is the 2019 album Dusk of the Ages. Now, Furor Gallico, or like I said, an Italian folk metal band that's been around since 2007, I believe. And this is probably the second to last album they released. They released a new album this year, which honestly the title of it kind of escapes me right now, but they're definitely a kind of band that definitely mixes like folk metal, traditional folk instruments, while adding some heavy metal in the music as well. So if anything, it's more like heavy metal with some folk instruments added to the music. And it also features like some male growls, male clean vocals, and some female vocals as well. And yeah, I really do feel like Furor Gallico may be a band that would pique your interest if you're into some folk metal or heavy metal with some folk metal influences. So definitely a band I recommend and check out. So yeah, I definitely recommend this album and the band overall. So yeah, Furor Gallico and the album Dust of the Ages. Definitely a band to check out. Next up is an industrial heavy metal band that I've heard about, that I've known about, and I don't hear a lot of people talk about them, and that's Daath. Daath, yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it, Daath, and this is the album, The Hinderers. Like I said, Daath are like a heavy metal, industrial metal band that's been around since the early 2000s and have been on hiatus until recently when they released a new album this year. And I feel like Daath are a band that really blends some heavy riffs, some industrial moments, and they have like a very straightforward heavy metal sound to them. You know, you don't get any surprises with this band, but what they do very well. And if you're into like heavy metal with some industrial metal influences, I definitely recommend this band. And also have a bit of death metal influences in their music as well. And yeah, definitely a band to check out, and definitely check out this album from them that was released back in 2007, The Hinderers. Definitely a band I really recommend to check out, and that's Daath. Okay, another band I'm pretty sure everybody knows about, but I feel like they don't get talked about or get brought up enough, and that's Septicflesh. Yeah, Septicflesh, and this is the album Revolution DNA. I'm pretty sure everybody knows who Septicflesh are, but if you don't know, they're like a Greek symphonic death metal band that's been around since the 90s. And I definitely feel like the band that doesn't get talked about or gets brought up enough. And they're actually a really solid band if you're into like the more symphonic death metal sound from them. And their music can be very cinematic and theatrical. Well, at times can be very heavy as well. So definitely a band I feel that should be talked about and should be more well known. So yeah, Septic Flesh, and this is the album Revolution DNA. Definitely a band to check out, and this album is definitely an album I also recommend. Okay, next up is a US death metal grindcore band that honestly released only one album and just disappeared, as far as I know, which is strange because this album is on a major label, and that's Theories. And this is the one and only major label debut album through Metal Blade Records, Regression. And yeah, this band plays like death metal grindcore. No big surprises, just some straight up death metal grindcore, and you kind of know what to expect. It's fast, heavy, brutal, very riff driven, and just chaotic, but not like over the top, if you know what I mean. And I feel like Theories is a band that got lost in the shuffle, so to speak, because this album was released back in 2015 through Metal Blade Records, and for some reason, this band and this album just disappeared. You know, nobody ever talked about them. Nobody ever brings this band up or this album up. It's like they just disappeared from the face of the planet. And I have no idea if they did a follow up to this album or not. But I definitely urge anyone who's into death metal or grindcore to check out Theories' one and only major label debut album, Regression. You know, if you're into your death metal grindcore, this band is definitely a band I recommend. So, yeah, Theories, Regression. Next up is a Canadian hard rock, heavy metal, well, more like a hard rock and roll band, but they can have some heavy metal moments to it. And they're from Toronto, I believe, and that's Danko Jones. Yeah, Danko Jones are like a long running hard rock and roll band that have some touches of heavy metal in their music, and they definitely have like this sleazy 80s um kind of vibe, you know? It definitely have like a Motley Crue feel to their music, and it's just really fun, enjoyable, and a band that doesn't take themselves too seriously. They just want us to have some a fun, walking good time. And if you're into that, Danko Jones is definitely a band I recommend. And yeah, if you're into that kind of sound, I definitely recommend checking out Danko Jones. And this is the album We Sweat Blood, which is an album that I definitely recommend checking out if you want to get into them. So yeah, Danko Jones. Definitely a great hard rock and roll band from Canada that I urge anyone who's into that sound to check out. Okay, next band needs no introduction, but I feel like this band doesn't get talked about enough, and that's Biohazard. I'm pretty sure anyone who's into hardcore metal during the late 80s, 90s know who Biohazard are. You know, they're like one of the pioneers of the whole hardcore metal crossover um, group during the early 90s, even though they started in the late 80s. And yeah, they definitely had that aggression, hard edge attitude, but also having that very metal sound in the music. Like you can definitely hear the hardcore metal influence in the music, and I really enjoy them for that. And I really feel like Biohazard are a band that doesn't get talked about enough. So I'm going to give them a mention here. So if for some reason you never heard Biohazard, I definitely recommend checking them out. And this album, Urban Discipline, which is definitely one of the best albums in my opinion. So yeah, Biohazard, definitely a band to check out if you haven't. Okay, here's another band that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, but I feel like it needs to be brought up more because nobody ever talks about them, and that's Misery Index. Yep, if you're into your technical death metal grindcore that's heavy, brutal, straightforward, and in your face, Misery Index got you covered. They're definitely a band that if you're into that kind of music, you gotta check them out. And I feel like this band doesn't get talked about enough, you know? Even though they're not doing anything different or changing styles or anything, what they do best, and I really enjoy them. And yeah, if you're into your death metal, grindcore, that's technical, brutal, and straightforward, I definitely recommend checking out Misery Index. A great extreme metal band, in my opinion. So, this is the album Rituals of Power, an album that I definitely recommend if you want to get into them. So yeah, that's Misery Index. Okay, next up is a band that I know nobody has ever heard of, and I feel like they lost um got lost in the shuffle, you know? This band just never gets talked about, never gets brought up. And I feel like people who's into like some groove metal or straight up extreme metal will totally dig this band. And that's the Defaced. Like I said, they play like a groovy, thrashy, kind of straightforward metal sound that's heavy, extreme, and very riff driven. Really good stuff, can be pretty brutal, and it's just a really fun band if you're into like the whole groove metal mixing with thrash and some straight up heavy metal. But yeah, the Face are a band that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, and definitely a band I do recommend checking out. So yeah, the Face, and this is the album Karma and Black. Definitely an album to check out if you want to get into them, in my opinion, and definitely a band to check out. So yeah, that's the face. Yeah, that's the faced. Okay, next up is actually a metalcore band, and that's God Forbid. Yeah, God Forbid are like a U.S. metalcore band that had their heyday and popularity during the 2000s, but kind of got lost in popularity and kind of died off after like the 2010 and somehow nobody ever talks about them. And I feel like God Forbid is definitely a band that needs to be brought up more, needs to be talked about more. If you're a fan of metalcore or some thrashy sounding metal, God Forbid will have you covered. They're definitely a band that are fun, heavy, and just a really good time. You know? And yeah, God Forbid are a solid metalcore band. They're up there with Lamb of God, Killswitch Engage, and Shadows Fall as being one of the better bands playing that whole metalcore style without being stale or boring. They're a really great band. Definitely check them out. That's God Forbid, and this is the album Gone Forever. Great album, great band. And the last album that I'm going to show off is from a band that I sure as hell know that nobody has ever heard of outside of Canada, and that's Breach of Trust. And this is the debut album, Songs of Dying Nation. Now, Breach of Trust are kind of like a new metal-ish alternative rock band that I grew up listening to, and I actually really enjoyed the music. They're one of the earlier bands that really got me into like rock metal as a child, and I really feel like they're very underrated, underappreciated, and nobody outside of Canada has ever heard of this band, and that's a shame. I mean, if you're into like new metal and some alternative rock, this band album will definitely appeal to you. Even if you're not into those, um, even if you're not into that style or genre of music, I'd still recommend Breach of Trust because I really feel like the songs has a very serious and solid tone to them, and it's not like they are like not. I'm not saying they're like really serious, but they definitely have some very straightforward songs that they definitely have some straightforward songs that deviate from your new metal cliche, in my opinion, and lyrically as well. But yeah, if you never heard Breach of Trust, I definitely recommend checking them out in the album Songs of Dying Nation. Songs I recommend off this album is Disease, Who Am I, Complicated, and Bring Me Down. Yeah. Definitely a band to check out. That's Breach of Trust and Songs of Dying Nation. And that's it, everyone. Those are the 10 bands that I feel should be more well known, should be talked about more, and hopefully everyone who check out those bands will find something they like. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully everyone enjoyed this video. Let me know if you've heard of these bands. Let me know if you like them, enjoy them, or dislike them. Just let me know. And I'll do another video if I have a chance. If I feel like it, I mean. Anyways, have a good week and take care.